And boom, and we're live, and welcome to another edition of Life is People. Well, today's 10th of November, and we woke up today, and the birds were singing, and the very fact that we all didn't wake up in some Armageddon nuclear war disaster was the very fact of, I think, something we talk about a lot is the very fact that life is people, and life does go on. Anyway, Holly, how are you doing tonight? I'm getting the same feedback problems. How are you doing tonight, Holly?
I'm good, Tim. Thanks for having me. Am I coming through okay?
Okay, I think we're just going to have to battle with this, Holly. So I think what we're going to do, I'm going to kind of maybe just do it as a to and fro. What we're going to do, we're going to talk tonight about the fourth generation, the generations, the thing we're going to talk about. So what maybe give an overview, and then I can sort of try to see if I can hear as much as I can, and we can see how we can get on with this discussion. But maybe sort of give us an overview, because I think we're talking about, particularly with what's going on in the world at the moment with Brexit we were mentioning before, and as we were sort of saying earlier on, maybe there's a bit of a Western Spring going on, and I think this is in this point in that theories we're in a point of crisis in the fourth stages of things. So again, this can be your over thoughts, and maybe for a good place to start with, where did you first hear about this? Well, we seem to be having lag issues here, Holly. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll play a track and see if we can find some solution to this. So as we're waiting to do this, I'll play What More Can You Do by Backwater.
Hey, Tim. You hear me okay?
Hi, Holly. Can you hear me?
Hi, Tim. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. We seem to be sort of in sync. This is good. We seem to be holding the. Oh no, no, there it goes again.
Are you losing me? Am I losing you?
We seem to have a very, very bad delay here, Holly. I don't know how. When I can you how close can you hear me? If I say hello now, can you hear me?
Yeah, your delay is very short. It's within a second or two. I'm hearing you all right. How about me?
Yeah. So it's obviously just my end. So I seem to be getting. Okay, Holly. Can you hear me now?
I can. How about me?
Perfect. Right. Okay. For some reason, and I do apologise for anybody listening to this right now live. Now, we for whatever reason, the delay issue seems to be sorted out, and we seem to have a sort of an understanding. So anyway, kind of a brief sort of overview anyway tonight, and we kind of had these sort of problems and stuff. But before we go any further tonight, let's just start this properly. How are you doing tonight, Holly? Can you hear me, Holly? Again, while we're waiting for connections, again, this is a very perfect example of why life is people. We live in the moment, and that's all we can do. So again, while we're waiting for maybe these connection problems going, again, this is from the start, and it's a track we recorded last weekend, an old track called "What More Could I Do."
What more could I do? I gave my life for you. Oh yeah. God only knows. I try to keep the love inside. Ain't no use in believing in anything you say. What's the use in believing anyway? 1,000 deaths can never kill you. Takes the hands and never heal you. Silence can hear you. Death will never free you. So tell me why. What more could I do? What more could I do? I gave my life to you. God only knows I tried to keep the love inside. What more could I do? I gave my love to you. God only knows I tried to keep the love inside.
Now, Holly, can you hear me?
Hi, Tim. I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, fantastic! Finally, we have connection.
Holy shit! Yeah, I'm really happy about that myself. Okay.
Cool. So, what any sort of further ado? I mean, one of the things I think we wanted to sort of like start this whole conversation was it was something we kind of had in a private conversation a few weeks back, and it was something I thought would be good to explore was the generational theory. Now, I think it's really relevant to the times we live in right now and the days we live in right now, because I think if you take that theory perspective, we're in the crisis moment, and in the also in that theory. I mean, I'm the classic nomad. I mean, I'm a classic nomad in the when I was born, how it describes what I was, and maybe hopefully if that's a sort of allude to where we're going to go. But I think the crux of the issue, and I think I really wanted to explore this with you, is it's we've seen this repeating pattern before, and we're at this crisis moment with with maybe like the nomads who are coming to the point of the focus, and the millennials as well. And it's something, and I'll have to hear your thoughts on all of where A, did you come across this theory, and did you discover it, and B, sort of leading on to that is I'll have to hear your sort of general overthoughts on where do you think this we can finally break this fourth generational cycle, or do you think, I mean, I know you're very optimistic about the millennials in particular.
Okay. Yeah, I can't help but be a little optimistic about them, and it's just because I see some attributes that they have that kind of speak to what you were talking about. That even though there is this cyclical sort of regeneration of generations, and it seems to go, and I'll get into that a little bit more. There's really a theory that's sort of well backed that goes with this. Um, the millennials, for me, just through observation, be a group of minds that of course they're like no others. Of course we have if you follow the theory, it does sort of go in cycles of four. But they seem to have some attributes that sort of set them aside from any other time in history, and also kind of like you mentioned, there is sort of the crisis moment that we're in. If you want to call it a moment, that's absolutely appropriate, because it's not like everything that has surrounded our existence and everything else is so vastly long that we're not just a moment. Like we're just a tiny speck of a moment in the whole grand scheme of things. But so let me get into this a little bit more, because I think the way you said it is perfect. We are, I think many could feel we're at a sort of a crisis moment with a lot of things. It's sort of a crisis of humanity, and it's not the first time that we've seen it. The particular theory and the way that I got onto this, I'll just go back to that. I sort of had this feeling that I was looking through the generations, sort of having a thought one day, and thought, I had a great influence in my life from my grandparents. And so if you want to look at it that way, they a generation called the GI generation. And they're sort of on the cusp of the next generation down from that, which is generally called the silent generation. But they're of a generation that had to adapt a lot to very little. They had very little, and they did a lot with it. And so what that generally depicts is that they can take a lot, they can do a lot, with very little, and that equates to the Depression era folk. I mean, that's how people think of the GI generation. They lived through unnameable, unspeakable things, and made the most with being very frugal. And so when I reflect on my grandparents, and then I take a look at maybe the next generation down, which is generally, obviously, that next generation is the baby boom generation. They tend to take a lot of flack, I think, but and not necessarily to their detriment, but for good reason. That they really grew up in a time that was sort of, it was really easy. There were a lot of they lived in kind of the fattest moment in history, especially, and this is, when I talk about this, I don't necessarily mean for everyone in the world. I think this is particularly starting with a study of Americans. more than anything. And by Americans, I don't mean to bring in everyone in North and South America, but just the United States is a great study for this. The culture in the United States is so wonky about some things that it makes for a really interesting study. So I had this thought this one day, and I had it a while ago, and then it kept entering into my mind, and I came across this article, which I'll provide you the link for if you'd like, but it was on a website called scholarsandrogues.com. It was published in 2014, and it was called How Generation X Will Save the World. And so I saw the title to that, and I thought, wow, shit, I really probably ought to read this. And I didn't necessarily want to read it going into it with the thought that I would have this, moment of glee that I actually belong to Generation X and there's some sort of meaning in my life that I'm going to get from this article, but I was super curious. And so in the article, it actually does talk about the theory that is a real theory that's strongly backed, and the theory about that is it's the generational theory. It was developed by two gentlemen named Strauss and Howe. And so once I read that article, I can go into it a little bit. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but the gist of it being that what you were talking about is really, strangely, that is totally addressed when you take a look at the theory that they actually came up with. And the theory is just this, that generations come in groups of four. Their theory, once I researched it a little more, I found that they were able to kind of work backwards on this and go back all the way to 1433. So there was a little bit of time that was given this study, and they took the time to kind of go through and take a look at the phases of life and the relationship between those phases of life and the actual generations, and relate the events in all of society to those generational groups of four. So there are, if you follow the theory precisely, and it's, I tend to not follow everything precisely or much of anything precisely, but it was an interesting study at the very least. There is the first phase, which is what you would call that generation is the prophet or the idealist. If you equate that to the modern age, that's the transcendental generation. Those were actually, no, let me skip forward a little bit. The prophet in more modern times would have been the late 19th century, the missionary generation. They are characterized as their high by the Reconstruction and the Gilded Age. They were the first of four generations in the modern or semi-modern time. And the reason I went back to the late 19th century was because that was the beginning of the four cycles before you get to the baby boomers, which are actually the four that we're working with now. The lost generation came after the missionary generation, and they're depicted as the second in four, commonly known as the nomad. The nomad is also referred to as reactive. Generation below them, and there was something that describes their phase is typically described by an awakening. So we've got four phases here. We have the prophet. I'll just do this. I'll go through this really quick. The prophet, the nomad, the hero, and the artist. Okay, so that's your four groups. Associated with prophet is that there is a high. There's a high in society. There's the high was associated with the Renaissance. The high was associated with the era of good feeling back in the late 18th century. Next group, the nomads, also known as reactive, are associated with awakening. The next group, the heroes, are associated with unraveling, which means some pretty rapid change in most cases. And then the fourth and last group in their theory is the artist group, commonly associated with a crisis. So when you said crisis, that immediately rung with me, because that's pretty much what the most current generation is working through. This is kind of the crisis time in the cycles of four, and maybe sort of a little bit of conscious awareness, it does seem like more than any time in the last at least 100 years, it seems like we're going through another crisis. I don't know what to say when you ask whether or not, there's a way to break out of this cycle that seems to be provable since the early 15th century, according to studies. And I don't want to weigh in too hard on it is just a theory, but there's so many interesting aspects to it because it's not like astrology or anything else where you can say, oh, you're that sign, that makes sense. And then, somebody might say, oh, well, that's an attribute that's really you because you're a Leo, or you're a Libra, or, it's actually going along with world events and aligns itself with world events. So this is a study that's really interesting to me. Lee and I spoke about it briefly the other day, actually, because it kind of equates to a portion of what he touches on with Wiki being. Funny enough, I mean, it does make sense. It's just sort of funny. A lot seems to go back to that. It's fun to talk about. But if you're looking at things from an anthropological study, the culture, the modern, anything modern going on, anything that we can look to in our history books, whether it be verifiable or real or not, any sort of interpretation of anything kind of goes along with this idea that we are in a sort of a 4-generation cycle, and we can, if nothing else, we can take a look at that and say, well, what's going to happen next? Are we just going to go, sort of back to that next generation, which is going to start over kind of with the prophet and have a high? Like the baby boom generation was the prophet generation. They lived in the high. They lived while America was actually regarded as a superpower before everything sort of started to go awash again. And I'm sure anywhere in the world there might be people that never really felt like America was a superpower, a great, a good guy like Captain America or something like that, idealistic. But at the same time, kind of where I go with it. It was fun to find that article. It sort of tied in a lot of things for me. I didn't take it to my head, and get a big ego about the fact that I am a member of Generation X. But I did identify with a lot of the things that, it does describe sort of the journey of people that are our age and what has come before us, what we've dealt with, and how we relate to the generations below us.
Well, I think that's a really good point to sort of start with, Holly, because I think maybe just I'll read, and I think it's particularly like you say, because we're both from that Generation X. So sort of like to sort of clarify this and sort of start the very point. Let's read when I read this from the wiki definition of what a nomad is, or someone born in the Generation X, sort of, which you were quite eruditely speaking upon. And this is the description. It says, nomad generations are born during an awakening, a time of social ideals and spiritual agendas, when young adults are passionately attacking the established institutional order. Nomads grow up as underprotected children during this awakening, come of age as alienated post-awakening adults, become pragmatic midlife leaders during a crisis, and age into resilient post-crisis elders. Now, I think what's fascinating about that, and again, I think you're quite, wisely sort of saying, I mean, everything in life is a guide. And when I read that first few years back, I remember thinking, wow, that's as a kind of a brief overview, that's pretty damn close to what my existence was growing up. I mean, I've always sort of riled against and I'm sure you can speak of on the same personally. And I meet a lot of people in my age group, and we sort of felt that. And I think one of the fascinating things, and this is why I wanted to allude this to, maybe a couple of things you could speak upon. I mean, you are. It's so brief in time, and I'm always very. I think like yourself. I don't know. It's just my experience, but the further I get down the life, I think 100 years is nothing. It's literally one person's life, and if you go back 3 people's lives, that's the beginning of America. We're just a blink in time. But I think what's fascinating about then, especially if you sort of follow the theory back, and I recommend anyone listening to this now in the future, please, like all things, go and research it yourself. Don't take my word for it. Don't take Holly's word for it. Learn as much as, read as much as you can on this whole subject. But one of the fascinating things is whenever the nomads have come in the time when we have, it's been things like the Reformation, the printing press, and it's always these sort of times. And I think where you sort of see these general patterns, and I think this is where I get to where I am now. Okay, we're in this moment of a crisis, and we've got people from the nomad generation at our age at this moment. And I think one of the great things we've got, and I think it's something we discuss many times in private when we're discussing like the things we're building and stuff like this, but we have got exceptional tools in our hands. We've got an ally that, again, I refrain from using the word, but for want of a better word that seems to be in general parlance at the moment, we have artificial intelligence. Now I think it's just intelligence itself, but we have this new intelligence that we've got in our hands now. I don't know whether 10,000 years ago, if you want to go back on further big loops, maybe they had that 10,000 years ago. Maybe that's just a humanity cycle we keep going through, and when we could go into the Aztecs, and we could go into the Egyptians, and that's another whole rabbit hole we could go down. But right now, as far as we can know in our history and everything we've known about, we've got exceptional power and tools and the ability to use these tools and the ability to connect like never before. And I think it's quite relevant to what you're sort of saying really in the last sort of few weeks and months and what's gone on in this part of the world, and your election last night, is that never before have we had the ability to connect as human beings from all sides of the world. I mean, I was contemplating this last night, thinking even just 4 years ago, back to the, or take it back to when Obama got in first time around. Just think how much everything is advanced, the connections. Now we can all have these conversations. I've yet to meet you in person, you've yet to meet me in person, but we have a connection like never before. And that's why I think it's fascinating now, because it's like I say, if you relate to the fact that when the nomads and our generations have had, you go back through the clock of will back through history, and it was maybe the ones that started that gave the printing press, and what that unleashed. And I think, okay, man, look at the tools we have right now. And I think it's the same thing. We've spent a long time. I know I can only speak personally. I spent all my lifetime, like I said, riling against the establishment and just wanting to be kind of, getting to this paradigm moment, which I think we can do, this breakthrough moment where we can come out of this cocoon and break through and become the butterfly that we were supposed to be as a species. And the thing is, I think one of the things that, I'm sure it would be the same if we were speaking to someone 600 years ago or 300 years ago or whatever it may be. I think if we had the same people, we could all communicate, we'd all be thinking the same thing. And I think it's the same common thought we share now, is that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's just basically common, simple solutions. And at times, I'm sure you must be like it. I know Lee's like it. I'm at times thinking, we're not. Hey, how have we got to this point and this hasn't been done? How have we got to 2016 and we've still got these things haven't been progressed? But then it always, as we say before, many times in private, it falls on the hands of people like the nomads, the people that us few loose cannons. But the great thing is we've got the ability to connect. 200 years ago, it would have been, okay, could I have spoken to someone, maybe my reach, maybe a reach, if I was really, if I had established myself a bit, maybe my reach of contact, maybe a reach as far as Glasgow. I've got 60 miles down the road and gone a bit, I've got to a sort of a metropolitan place. Now, a click of a finger, I can instantly not only have knowledge, but I can also connect with people. And I think this is why I'm generally, again, I try to be optimistic in everything in my life, and I try to think on the positive side of everything. And that's why I think it is a really positive moment, because there are some dark moments in life and stuff. But like I said, I think the unique thing maybe that we've got that maybe no other generations have, and definitely the cycle before, when we had, like you say, the baby booms and stuff, they didn't have this. They had. I mean, we're right now. I use the analogy. We're nothing more than just monkeys prodding at the dark with sticks. I mean, man, but you go back 50 years ago, their source of knowledge was restricted around a few people. It was literally, that's why they had to rush so many Jewish people out of Germany at the second end of the war, and it was a few people and few, had this concentrated knowledge, and out they came with nuclear science and nuclear bombs and stuff like this. But now, That's what I'm saying. We have greater reach and greater knowledge. I don't care. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's just a general fact. A kid in Africa walking around with a smartphone has more knowledge in his hands than computing power than Bill Clinton did when he sent the people to up in the spaceship. I mean that it's immense when you think about that, and that's what gives me great hope. But equally, as I've always said before, and I'd like to wrap this up on this, technology or this intelligence, or whatever we want to call it, is always a neutral, and that's the point where it falls down to the individual, because it's going to be what we as individuals do, rather than turning our heads and going, oh, what's someone else going to do, what's someone else going to do. And I think that's one of the great things that I find about, again, that's, if you want to put us in that grouping of nomads, that's what we're all very like. We're very much individualistic people who basically say, no, that's why we're all collecting around this decentralized world, and we're all, like I said, we're at the edge of the, standing there and trying to, piece it all together. And we all have the vision, and it's just trying to lock all these pieces together. And that's why it does give me hope. And I think that, and again, I can only speak to someone who, I've had personal use. My son's that millennial generation, and they give me great hope. As much as we're fed this whole, particularly on social media, you kind of hear about, that kids are basically they're social justice warriors, or they're all hoodies going around, just don't give a care for any human being or anything at all. And I don't think that's the case at all. I mean, over here, that millennial generation are the ones that are exploding with entrepreneurship. They don't want to go out to work. They're breaking all the rules down and going, well, why do I have to go to 9 to 5? Why do I have to have a boss? Why can't I work from when I want to work? Why do I have to work at all? And why can't I just work? And you're seeing that in play right now. And I think that's fascinating. I feel what's going to be fascinating is that particularly over here, there's so many, like you say, there's so many sort of tangents to this, but that millennial generation, the thing that, again, one of the things I find I like to contemplate a lot is, particularly over here, they were all pushed into doing university education, which basically they all thought, oh, great, we're going to come out and we're going to have this baby boomer life. But what they're waking up to daily is they're all left now with college. They've all got ridiculously high debts, no jobs waiting for them. And it's kind of like, well, actually, now we've got this massive pool where everyone's got a degree. So it's going to be interesting to know what they do with that, because they are still faced with that reality. Well, the so-called reality of a debt. Now, it's what they do with it. Do they just go like my generation did, and a lot of my generation go, well, oh, okay, and they just become, okay, I'll get in that rabbit hole, I'll get on the hamster wheel, and I'll pay off my debts, and I'll pay my mortgage, and I'll have the 2.5 kids, and da 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 da, and then when I'm 70, maybe one day I'll retire, and then we just handing it all off to that, again, millennial generation. And it's what they're going to do with that is going to be fascinating, because I think the only way they're going to break free of this, which goes right back to full circle to where we started, is if they're going to is to break the chains of money. And the only way they're going to do that is to have solutions. And the solutions right now are going to have to be built by people like, of this nomad generation X.
You said it right there. I mean, the last thing, that was a great way to tie up that thought, because the whole thing was very, but that really just you lending some clues exactly how the cycle is going to be broken for all of us. The millennials, and I guess we don't have to. I don't like to refer to generation below us. To me in a lot of ways, a lot because I am a little older than a lot of people that I pay attention to when that I lend my attention to when I like to watch podcasts a lot to inform me on new technologies, and they all seem to be from an age group that's at least 10 years below me. and it's great to see. I'll encapsulate it by saying this, two things. And then I'll get back to what you said before, because I think that's absolutely relevant and totally spot on. That the millennials are, in a large part, the way they are because they were raised by us, or just a little slightly bit older than us, our generation, and makes them them. Not that it's totally to do with us, because they have grandparents and they have, other people they have their peers, they have their grandparents, but their parents are mostly nomads. And they do turn out the way they do because they weren't raised by people that can be described the way that the boomer generation was. And I'm going to make a point here by just getting a little excerpt out of this article that I think really does encapsulate, kind of where I see it, and not to, cut down too badly on the boomers, because they just, after all, we're a product of the generation that they are, their cycle in life. But this does sort of sum it up. It says, children and young adults during the fattest, richest season in human history. That's why they could take all those big cultural and political flyers back in the day. The country's stored up layers of social and economic capital were so thick under their butts that they were virtually guaranteed a soft and easy landing no matter what they did. The millennials were raised in much tougher times, but have been carefully protected and sheltered by their boomer and Xer helicopter parents. It says nomad generations are hands down the most attentive parents of any of the four cohorts in compensation for their own lack of parenting, who've done their best to keep them from taking big risks and experiencing consequences too harshly. As a result, they're not at their best in unfamiliar situations and don't act without consulting endlessly with each other. And because of this, they're prone to dither. It says that, and what occurs to me is that the communication level between peers in the age group below us and the generation below us is phenomenal. The communication lines just seem to flow so naturally, and that isn't true for necessarily our generation, where we seem to be a little bit disconnected. And it's amazing when we come together, but it may feel a little bit sometimes more like the exception than the rule. Like, our desire to communicate is no smaller or no littler than generations below us, but it doesn't come as naturally to us because a little bit of a disconnected way, and sort of had to keep our heads a little farther above water in some ways to feel at ease at opening those lines. Well, so, what you were saying about artificial intelligence and where we are with that, to our knowledge, we don't know have ever existed on this planet before. And that may or may not be true. That had it been true before, that it didn't just completely go away or get killed off by, some sort of process that eliminated it. Taking a look at utilizing that ties in very well with be the way that the cycle is broken, and that is what you touched on last, and that is the elimination of money, the elimination of not value, because value will always be there, but the elimination of monetary systems that may very well have started out with the right intention, but that are too easily manipulatable. I think what we're starting to see is a series of peel-aways of manipulatable systems, mutable systems, with immutable, solid things that can retain value without the needless, pointless rat race dirge that goes after any search, for instance. Like you were saying, no generation completely seems to have united. Like, there's always going to be those in generation that are sort of at one extreme opposite, well, on all facets of the pendulum, right? So it seems to me like when you take a look at the focus, the middle part of the pendulum, where it's the most, what you see is this incredible collaboration, and I see that that's the direction that it would be headed in. I'll back that up with a podcast that I was watching week, and I think this one was it was a guest speaker. I think it was Juan Benet on this one, but it was basically, and I am so glad that we're talking about this, because I wanted to share this with you anyway, and it's a link that I think that I put up there. But basically, this podcast was directing me to with And so we've been on the subject of IPFS. IPFS basically stands for Interplanetary File System. It's the alternative that we touched on to HTTPS. And Juan Benet, I was impressed with what he had to say about this. And he heads the IPFS project, but he basically hit it on. I mean, he's there. He sort of epitomizes the been making, and that is that really have their heads wrapped around completely all of the norms and the ideas that we've all lived with forever. The fact that we have to be in a routine, that we have to gain success in certain ways, that we have to fit some sort of mold. I think, I mean, it can be argued in history that this is, that molds, the mold breakers have always been around. Sometimes it can be so much more radical to see the way they're doing it. These kids, if I can call them that, I mean, they're not that much younger than me, but they are creating incredible platforms based on those two concepts. The fact that they're so good at communicating, it comes so naturally to them, and they're networking like crazy. And it's hopefully rubbing off. I think that it is. I've definitely not felt like I've been isolated. I definitely love to network as well, but also that the ideas that they're basing their platforms and their incredible ideas on are completely blowing old systems out of the water because they simply don't want to work. I mean, but they come at it from a different angle. Why are we working so hard? Why are we working, and for whom are we working, and what are we actually really getting out of it? And are we just spending our entire lives doing something that is in the end going to make us happy? And so why should we have to work so hard? So when you talk about AI, and I'll wrap my thought up with this, when you talk about AI, I see AI in the purest sense. AI should be around, and it should be developed in a way that eliminates every bit of work that we have to do, because we actually have the innovation now to eliminate that work so that people can get their minds away from the idea that they have to work. There are things that you do where you work at them, but it doesn't mean you have to go away from your home, away from your family, away from the meaningful things to you, unless you just like to get out there, and then you do that. But you don't do it for somebody else. You may do it for everybody because you're part of something, but you're not just making someone else rich. Spence.
Yeah, totally, Holly. And I think one of the things I think sort of like going back to the beginning, what you just said then, I think sort of almost defines the times we live in. And I think it's always worth repeating this loud and clear from as many places as possible, that even the theme, and and I know we've both been very clear to make sure to be insightful, to say to people, look, this is we're only representing our corners and what we're representing. But it is very true that the things that we discuss both in private and what we and all the rest of it, and like about the whole world of no money and stuff, this is something that I would argue that, all right, at the very most conservative of a small seat, for 60% of the world already work on this thing. If you go to the middle of the Amazon jungle, or middle of Africa, or some Asian, Malaysian place like that, they all understand the idea of exchange and all that sort of things. Now, that's why I think at the times and I think it's really at times worth remembering. I think, again, shouting out clear that because of what we are, and I think it sort of ties into maybe what it is. I mean, the reason we as nomads are like Generation X, the reason we feel like we do, and that's why we had the music we did, and we have kind of, it's made us outsiders, because like you said, I saw a lot of my generation just all went, oh, and when they're all 19, 20, we're all like, two fingers against the world, and fuck the system. And then, I go away for 10 years, come back, and everyone's spoke to Tony Blair, and it's all, I'm like, whoa, what happened? But the thing is, I think always worth reminding is that in your culture, and my culture particularly, we've been, we've seen it all my life. I've seen it all my life. We've been bred and brought up in a system, and we've become like stressed rabbits. And all the things, all this team mentality you see going on, and all this in our corners of the world, it's because we've been almost bred and conditioned into it from the day we're born. We were talking about this the other day, whether it's, religion and it feeds you when you're at an early age, or just a general drip of daily culture. And then let alone when you go to the school and they get their fangs into you and it's like, vroom, vroom, and this is what you're going to be. And you got 8 hours of that a day for 16 years. But the great thing is we do come through with that. But what I find, again, I think there's a definite, like all life. I mean, like you were saying, I mean, that's why I mentioned it earlier on. I mean, at the times before, like we said, there was the printing press to make things easier to sort of disseminate information to people, and that just led to a reformation. And none of the people, when Gutenberg was making his press in his little backyard in their back, he didn't sort of imagine that was going to bring down the Catholic Church, form what we are now, form the whole of the Enlightenment, and proceeding to where we are right now. He just looked at it, hey, this is just a better way of just, instead of one person scribing it and him being the middleman, let's cut that out and let's be able to distribute information. But on the back of that, a great thing happened, which is what we go into these cycles for. But what I think is really important, it's crucial what you say, because I think as much as the millennials, I see this time they've got all the connection and stuff like that. And it's one of the fascinating things I've seen, particularly delving my head into this rabbit world, particularly the crypto world in the last couple of years, is that you do see a lot of people around my generation, and you speak the truth. And they're very much in that, like I just said, this stressed, cornered rat mentality. It's all about team this and team that, and and they're all striving to make as quick as money as possible. And I can make a quick buck on Bitcoin, and I can, hey, if I invest in this, I can make loads on Steam it and DAO and all the rest of it. And it's just like this stress, like I say, this stress mentality going on. But that's part of our generation because we have been brought up with that. It's part of that where we were in our cycle of thing. But what I'm going to be finding fascinating is going to be, okay, we've got that mentality, but equally, and this is the yin to the yang, and maybe it's the sort of the other side of this perspective to look at completely. And I saw a bit of this going on, particularly what's live events here. There's the other surge, which again we see in history, is that millennial lot come through and they go, oh, out with the old then, and they just throw everything away. We're seen as old, and even the word. Look at some of the words that are used. Progressive, I mean, this country over here is just scarred, city after city after city, with the same. It's this cyclical thing going on where this new broom would come in, and we had it in the 30s, and they build these new shiny high rises, and they get knocked down, and the baby boomers came in again, and they did the whole thing again, and we're just left with these patterns. And I just really do hope that the millennial lot coming through don't just look at the world and go, oh, okay, it's all for us, and forget everyone else. Because as I said before, one of the things that I particularly see in a minute, that's one of the things when you do get to our age, you realize, like, okay, I know take me back when I was 25. Yeah, I mean, I may have all the same thought processes, a lot of what we're talking about, these kids, these 25 and that generation now, and we didn't have the tools. Great, and I see them and they're making immense progress like I would do. But equally, I've got the wisdom to know, hey, when I was in my 20s, I thought I knew it all. And when I'm in my 40s, I realized I don't know anything. In fact, I could spend generations upon generations of my lifetime, and I would still be able just to scratch the surface of one little point. And I think that's one of they've got to remember that we are just humans, and when people in their 20s, by general, because of that age, you've got all that testosterone, you've got all that hormones flooding around you. You peak of your thing, and you think you know it all. But when you get to the age I do, and I mean, this age where we are, you realize you don't know anything. And I think that's why you need the yin to the yang. And that's one of the things I do contemplate, because I've seen that pattern before, where the youth come through, they think they know it all, they see everything that's not in their little group mentality, and I suppose it speaks to the whole cycle of that generational theory, really, because that's exactly why it does go around that point. Because what particularly being of the generation we're very much the individualistics, and that's what we kind of seen being suppressed by conformity. But that conformity comes from one of them. And we hope that's what I'm saying. We hope we break the cycle, that the millennials coming through with all the power and the tools they got, they just don't decide to, let's start the whole thing again and destroy everything that's not part of our vision and under this collective new form. And I think that's really worth discussing as much as we can get optimistic about things and like that, because I think the way we can do that, and again goes back to what I'm saying, is we have to find ways. That's why I think it's important to have these where we connect people of my age, my generation, your generation, to that millennial age, because it's very, again, flip it around again. When I was 25, I didn't want to talk to anyone in their 40s. They were like, oh yeah, whatever, granddad, you don't know anything about, you were the time of the, sitting there in the 60s smoking weed and living part of that hippie dream, while I'm growing up in some godforsaken council estate with no money and no bleak job. So go away, granddad. So I get what it's like for 25-year-olds, but it's finding that connection. And I think that if you can keep that connection going, which is I keep going back to, we've got the ability, the tools are there. Now they're clunky. We found this out tonight in this conversation, but we can, with people, with the solutions are being built. And if we can just iron out those connection problems and get people to talk to people and not put any middleman between them, and just let them come up with ideas. And that's the point. Instead of directing ideas and saying, well, we should have this and we should have that. And that's what I love about particularly all the conversations we're having in private and all the things we're trying to build. There's no central plannings. That's what I love about it. It's that's why to me, I feel like I'm back when I'm a child. It's like, oh, this is like when I was like, before I went to school, and we all sit around and like, hey, what do we want to do? Let's find out. And we always come up with little ideas, and we're like, yes, there was none of this, my idea's got to win and all that. That was something we got taught when we were in school. And that's what I love about the decentralized world and the world we're in. Everyone's just there just to build the solutions to get it done. And I think and the reason I think we particularly feel it is that I really, really am crucial. I don't want that connection being lost between our generation and the generation above me and the generation below me. And I think if we can just connect everybody, because that's going to be the real key. If you can connect everybody and get them out of this whole team mentality, whether it's team red, team blue, team generation this, team generation that, my little flag this, your flag that, my football colour team, your football colour team, male, female, whatever it may be. And that's to me is the most frustrating thing I find about where we are now, Holly, because I've always had this stuff. And classically over here, in the 80s when there was all that yuppie stuff going on, I would have had this very conversation and they've gone, oh, you're some extreme left wing, blah, 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 blah. I have the same opinion now and say, hey, can we just let everyone be there? And you're deemed as some bigoted, homophobic, racist one. It's like, that's what I mean. It's that meme around you that if we can just break that, and that is done by connecting. Because one of the things I've found, and I'm sure you found, and this is one of the real white elephants no one wants to talk about, and I think you sort of mentioned it a bit earlier on. I think it's more probably optimistic in that is you're saying about the pendulum swings one way and there's always going to be people on the extremes. I think the people on the extremes are the very, very small, very, very small percentage. And most of us live in that middle bit of like, well, we all get up in the morning, we all eat, we all do all what we have to do, we sleep, we shit, we do, and we repeat. And hopefully we get a bit of love in between that, and we have some good times, and and we wake up again. And that's the majority of existence for everyone around. There's a very few people, and that's the thing. For all my lifetime, all your lifetime, these people have had the microphone, they've had the tools of power, and that's the generational shift we're going right now. And that's what you saw last night in the election. Nobody saw that coming. That's what I said before we went live. Everyone aligned behind one thing, and everyone's waking up today and going, oh, what happened? And they just don't see it. And that's what I think where we're going to break through. And that's why ironically, I was quite optimistic what happened last night, because I thought we could have gone an easy way. We could have easily gone to war. We could have just gone down the same path, and we could have just gone down the same route head on. And here we go. This repeat of the 80s and repeat of the 90s. But no, there seems to be something going on. And yeah, that's why I love it. I love when I hear the media scratching their head and everyone's like pontificating about everything and like, oh, and I think that's good. That's all part of this crisis thing, because out of that comes opportunity. Out of that opportunity comes innovation. Out of that innovation comes more connection. Hopefully with more connection comes more love. With more love comes more compassion, and then we evolve. And because if we just had those just a few things along the way, just a bit more compassion, just a bit more freedom, just a bit more living under the chains of money and all that crap, the world would transform. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not going to take us reinventing or anything reinventing the world. You just need to just free people, cut the middlemen away, cut the crap away, and you just watch how humanity will flourish.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That was a great run. Great thoughts. Yeah. And I think that it all comes back to what we were talking about with, well, what you originally said when you said that our generation, if you take a look at it specifically, have a lot of people in it that are just in this grind of rat race and sort of have that drive, and they're about it and sort of feeling like they're losing their grip. I think I see that. And then there's this thing that I think benefits the generations to come, and that is that and somehow be sort of broken a little bit, and you can see through it, and then all of a sudden you realize that all of the dramas and all of the things that happen in our lives, if we do see that sense, and I feel like a great many people do, specifically to people that are within the certain age group that fits the nomad, that if there's that drive and there's that sort of sense of, we were programmed a little bit that way. I think that we really didn't, we woke up to a world that wasn't like the immediate generations above us. And then sort of sitting back for a second and saying, okay, take the best of the things that we've learned, those things that drive us. Those are the things that benefit the generations below us. Even just the fact that we're having this conversation, that someone has original at all, and there's nothing new under the sun, but the fact that someone has taken the time to look at the cycles, that the 4 cycles or whatever you want to look at, it doesn't have to be narrowed to that, but taking a look at that and recording it and sharing it and bringing it forth in a meaningful way is something that I don't know has really been done to this level before. And even just capturing that a little bit, seeing where we are at this very moment in our lives, seeing, kind of what has made us, and how utilize that knowledge and center ourselves in that to be support for the generations below us and support what they're doing. Our kids, our friends' kids, our everyone that is meaningful, that plays a part in the generations that come below us, and recognizing their absolutely brilliant attributes, and really eliminating just sort of the things that don't go along with what would uphold them, like the rat race mentality and all of those things. I kind of get a sense that the generations that come after us have a natural tendency to shirk that anyway, to a degree. But the more support we are for that, the more we all really do come together. It's, we don't have to be stressed rabbits, and the less we act like stressed rabbits, the more it will sort of tie in everyone a little bit to say, oh, because I feel the same way. Like, I was totally there when I was 20. God, I knew everything. I knew everything. Nobody could tell me shit. Like, I had everything handled. I was on top of my game. Not to say that I wasn't fucking up here and there and everywhere, and just sort of making my way through life in a funny way, my own way, and not really trying to harm anyone else, but for sure just sort of stumbling and trying to get a grasp on what was. But that was the essence of the mentality for me, that never trust anybody over 30. Once you hit a certain age, it was like, I don't really know if I can even relate to you. Like, and the whole stereotypical sense of generations above that can't stand the music of the youngsters and all that. I mean, that's what I constantly heard when I was coming of age. When so many of us were coming of age, we were ridiculed for what we were doing because there was really a gap in understanding of exactly how things really are meant to change, meant to evolve, and they don't evolve away necessarily, but there's so many people that I think that were in generations above us that were threatened by that. And that
is definitely something that I think is beginning to transform. That there is a better acceptance, you know, of change that comes, but it's not a threat. It's an evolution. It's a revolution. It's new things, and they're not bad things. You know, there's good and bad in every aspect of life. There are good choices and there are bad choices, but that's all we have. You know, I mean, we're here, we're doing our thing, and really the only thing that we have is our choices. And you know, you take the pendulum and you take a look at that, and I think that you started to touch on it, that and it might have been something that I didn't really necessarily address before, but people that sort of tend to hang in the middle of the pendulum, even though that motion might be there, they're sort of just, you know, in the center and sort of not moving from one side to the other, definitely not swaying from one end to the other. The ends are a good thing too. You know, those ends are the revolutionary, you know, aspects of culture as well. No matter where you are in the world, and with extremes, there's going to be a little bit of damage here and there, but without those swings, then, you know, we all just sort of tend to be at rest and comfortable, and that has its own danger, I suppose, you know, but that's definitely not something that I see with Generation X. You know, it's not, I have actually just, you know, come to be united with people that I wasn't sure existed, because I do live in a fairly remote, culturally remote part of the world, as well as populational. And so coming across people that actually, you know, sort of see the benefit of not just locking themselves into and being married to a life that sort of they think is meaningful, but just is populated and polluted with all sorts of things that just don't really benefit themselves. I mean, I speak about, you know, just the aspects of people that get caught up in the stressed rabbit phase, and they seek happiness within that and don't really want to look outside of it because it's scary. You know, it's scary to look outside of a little, you know, a little bit of comfort that comes with a conformed life. And I guess what I was saying before is that I've actually started to really develop relationships with people, not very many, but it's a start, that see outside of that. It's so hard to find people that know how to do for themselves, know how to make. To just make anything, you know, and not rely on anyone else for what they need. And it's not that we're all islands. I mean, we all, it's fair to say, should have certain things that we can rely on, you know, for more of a communal kind of life. But coming back to where we are with this, you know, the generations that lay below us right now are benefiting, I think, from, may I be so humble as to say, they're benefiting from a little bit of a breaking loose of the norm that a nomad generation may have felt in the past, that they are reactive and they're awakened, but they don't have the tools that we have. They don't have the sense of multi-generation existence that I think that we're beginning to have, and that could very well be the thing that breaks us all loose. Not that I would attribute all of the benefit or all of the credit to our generation. It's just been culminating for a very long time. But if you take a look at the generations below us, the two that, you know, make up the modern generations that fall below, and then those that will come after them, are dealing with the repercussions of things that occurred well before us. Like, all of us coming down through time are dealing with the repercussions of generation after generation after generation of buildup. And it takes that breaking free from that to really to really realize that there is a cycle. And that none of us need to really be in it anymore. But that this may continue. It may just sort of mellow a little bit, that we don't have to go through this whole fat cat existence through, the next ones that sort of don't really get the benefit from that. Shit. Are you still there? Hey, Tim, I think it's probably just the podcast trying to tell me that I talked too long. Are you there?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I think do you know what I think it is, Holly? And I like to look at this point of view. I think at times, sometimes we have conversations, and if you want to go by the whole WikiLeaks one, there is someone at NSA. Listen, they just go, "Nah, that's it. You two are talking and connecting far too much. You're making too much of a great connection. No, we're going to put something in." So I think at times the universe tries to sell things, but equally, I think it's really kind of, and maybe we should wrap this up, because I think it's one of them ones that are kind of it's a more in-depth conversation. But I think I really wanted to wrap it up by sort of saying, I think sort of the whole sort of theme of our conversation, and I think one of the things that daily inspires me, and that's why I like to say it a lot, and that's why I do say that I think we live in the greatest days. But I think one of the things that really inspires me greatly is, and I can only speak personally, is that I, for instance, I had the concept of something like, the general concept of N99 and the idea of just musicians and creative people just sharing stuff 20 years ago. And I remember, I sat literally down under the Southern Cross in Argentina, looking at the stars one night and spending a week going through, with one of my dear friends is a coder, and just coming to the conclusion, like, the technology ain't going to be here. It's going to take 20 years to get to, and that's my great optimistic thing now, because I've just been sat there like waiting, a bit like you were quite eruditely speaking upon, Ollie, because I think it's part of the shaping of us as again, and I only speak of where we are, or the part of the world we are, maybe even personally, I can only speak myself, but I know that feeling you're talking about. I remember when I remember having it the very first time I left, personally speaking, when I left the UK, and I remember going to Argentina, and it was like, there's this weight off my shoulder, like, I can not be like a stressed rabbit, and there's creative people who want to listen to me and appreciate me, and I can have some conversations, and I think that's where maybe what I went through 20 years ago, and I'm sure many people in my circumstances, in our age group, went through. When you do like you're eruditely saying where you are now, but when you do have that, it's that weight goes from your shoulder, and you're like, oh, I'm not. I'd have to be that stressed rabbit mentality we're talking about. It does produce this creation. Now that's one of the things that we're seeing, I think, on a global perspective right now. I think we're going through that whole end of these stress times because of the technology, because we can have. That's what I'm saying before. We do. We meet every week. We sit there. We have, what was it last week? 8-hour plus conversations about how we're going to build this how we can improve, how we can build platforms and stuff like. Now this is, like I said before, this is unique in my lifetime. I've never known this before, and I remember saying 20 years ago, and I'm always constantly saying this to myself, that I would have dreamed of having just 1% of the tools that I had now. The thought that I could have 20 years ago looked and gone, well, in 20 years' time, you'll be sat there talking to someone in Colorado about the new decentralized world would have just blown our minds. But that's where we are. And I think that overall is the optimistic times that we live in, and hence the reason I think we can sort of march on, in a sense of as a species into the future in an optimistic light. Well, it's been a kind of a really insightful conversation tonight with you, Holly. And I know we've had our troubles with, well, yeah, we haven't had our troubles. Google have had their issues with this conversation tonight and whatever. And it's a perfect example of that whole point, kind of the theme of the conversation. It was we're in that crisis moment, and the point of that crisis moment is when things start to collapse and fall under their own weight because no one looks after it. And this is what we're seeing with the technology. But you know, despite our the connection problems and stuff, it's been an absolutely insightful conversation. We'll have to pick this up again, Holly, and do this again, because I think there's so much we kind of we've left unsaid. But from me over here, and I know you may be struggling to hear me right now, but over from and I want to say, life is people, people.